Marcus thought he was different. He thought his love would be the one she couldn't contain, couldn't catalog, couldn't reduce to a specimen behind glass. He met her at a bookstore, of course he did, reaching for the same copy of Crime and Punishment. Her fingers brushed his, and in that moment, he felt the universe collapse into a single point of contact. But here's what Marcus didn't see: the way her eyes cataloged him, even as she smiled. The slight tilt of her head that said, "Interesting specimen." The practiced surprise that had worked on 23 men before him. The courtship felt like falling into warm honey. She would text him poetry at 3 a.m., show up at his door with wine and questions about his childhood, trace the scars on his hands while whispering about the beauty of broken things. Marcus had never felt so seen, so understood, so perfectly mirrored back to himself. She seemed to exist in the exact shape of his loneliness. She built a shrine to their love in her apartment. Photographs, ticket stubs, the napkin he'd written his number on. Marcus found it romantic until he noticed the other shrines, tucked behind curtains and in closets. Different men, different memories, all preserved with the same obsessive care. When he asked about them, she smiled that practiced smile and said, "You're different. You're the one I've been waiting for." But waiting for what? Marcus began to notice the pattern, how she would disappear for days, then return with stories of helping a friend, visiting family, needing space to process her feelings for him. How she seemed to know exactly what to say to keep him hungry, exactly when to withdraw to make him chase. How her love felt less like devotion and more like a masterfully played instrument. The night he found his own photograph already printed and waiting in a frame beside her bed, before he'd even told her he loved her, Marcus understood. He wasn't her destination, he was her collection. She didn't love him, she loved the idea of being loved by him. She was addicted not to connection, but to conquest, to the moment when a heart stops beating for itself and starts beating only for her. Schopenhauer whispered it centuries ago. We mistake the satisfaction of capturing for the joy of loving. The will to possess masquerades as the will to connect. This is what psychologists call emotional vampirism, coined by psychologist Albert Bernstein. It describes those who sustain themselves on the emotional energy of others. In the modern world, you see it in the friend who only calls during their crises, the partner who thrives on your insecurity, the boss who feeds on your anxiety. Social media has turned us all into collectors, measuring our worth by hearts and likes and the number of people who orbit our carefully curated selves. Through Schopenhauer's lens, this becomes even darker. The emotional vampire isn't just taking your energy, they're unconsciously enacting the will's cruelest trick, using love itself as a weapon of suffering. The vampire believes they're seeking connection, but they're actually fleeing from the terror of their own emptiness. And you, the victim, mistake being needed for being loved. The ancients called it enchantment. Today, psychology names it emotional vampirism. Marcus stares at his jar, watching his heart beat against the glass. The label reads his name in her careful handwriting. But here's what keeps him awake at night. He can't remember what his heart felt like before she captured it. He can't remember what he wanted before he wanted her. The glass isn't just a prison, it's become his entire world. What does your jar look like? And what would you find if you finally had the courage to break the glass? The collector never realizes that a heart in a jar isn't a heart at all, just the memory of what it used to be, beating out of habit in the dark. The blueprint arrives in his dreams, detailed and precise. Every room designed for her comfort, every shadow calculated for her beauty, every doorway measured to frame her perfectly as she moves through their future life. David wakes with architectural certainty. This house will be different from all the others, not the cramped apartment where his ex complained about the noise, not the sterile condo where another lover felt like she was living in a museum. This house will be the physical manifestation of perfect love, a structure so precisely crafted that happiness will have no choice but to inhabit it. He spends months drawing plans, researching materials, visiting show homes with the fervor of a pilgrim seeking sacred spaces. The kitchen island, positioned so she can cook while he reads nearby. The bedroom windows, angled to catch the morning light across her skin. The garden designed with her favorite flowers in arrangements that will bloom in sequence, ensuring beauty in every season. He even installs a reading nook with built-in bookshelves, knowing how she loves to lose herself in stories. The construction becomes his obsession. Every nail driven with intention, every wire run with the precision of a man threading together the mechanics of love itself. His friends worry. He's spent his savings, his inheritance, his future earnings on this monument to a relationship that exists more in potential than reality. But David knows what they don't. Architecture shapes behavior. Environment creates emotion. Build the right container, and love will flourish like a plant finally given proper soil. When she moves in, the house works exactly as designed. She glides from room to room like she was born there, her laughter echoing off walls, positioned to amplify joy, her silences cushioned by spaces crafted for contemplation. For 3 months, they live inside David's dream, made manifest. She cooks in the perfect kitchen, reads in the perfect nook, sleeps in the bed positioned to wake her gently with morning light. But then she begins to wither. The house is too perfect, she says, too designed. She feels like a character in someone else's story, moving through rooms that know her better than she knows herself. The kitchen island becomes an altar where she performs the ritual of domesticity rather than the pleasure of creation. The reading nook feels like a cage built from someone else's idea of who she should be. The bedroom windows, so carefully angled for morning light, become spotlights, exposing how she fails to be the woman David envisioned waking up beside. She starts staying at work later, visiting friends more often, sleeping in the guest room, because the master bedroom feels like a mausoleum to a version of herself she never agreed to become. David responds by perfecting the house further, adjusting lighting, rearranging furniture, installing new fixtures, convinced that the right environmental equation will restore their happiness. But each improvement feels like another constraint, another way the house insists she be the woman it was built for, rather than the woman she is. The night she leaves, David walks through the empty rooms, understanding finally what he's built. Not a home, but a beautiful prison. Not a space for love to grow, but a shrine to his own need for control. He created the perfect container for a relationship, but forgot that love isn't a thing to be contained. It's a living force that needs room to surprise, to change, to grow in directions no blueprint can anticipate. This is what Freud identified as reaction formation. Coined in his studies of defense mechanisms, it's the unconscious process of converting uncomfortable feelings into their opposite. In relationships, we see it. When controlling behavior masquerades as care, when jealousy poses as protection, when the need to possess disguises itself as devotion. Modern dating apps have turned us all into architects, swiping through profiles, trying to find someone who fits our predetermined specifications rather than remaining open to who they actually are. Schopenhauer understood this deeply. The will creates suffering, not just through wanting, but through the illusion that we can engineer satisfaction. We build elaborate structures, physical and emotional, believing we can trap happiness inside them, when happiness exists only in the freedom to be authentically ourselves alongside another who is free to do the same. In myth, it was Pygmalion's curse. In you, it's the habit you can't see. Reaction, formation. David sits in his perfect house, listening to the silence echo off walls, designed for laughter. Every room still holds the shape of his dreams, but dreams, he realizes, were never meant to be permanent structures. They were meant to dissolve each morning, making space for the unpredictable beauty of real life. When did you stop building homes and start constructing monuments to who you think your lover should be? What rooms in your heart were designed for someone else's comfort rather than your own truth? The perfect house stands empty now, waiting for someone who will never exist, because perfection, it turns out, is just another word for death. She speaks in exhibits, each story carefully curated, each emotion mounted and displayed behind glass. Thomas pays admission every time he listens, though he never realizes he's become both visitor and patron of her private museum of pain. It starts with vulnerability, that precious currency of modern intimacy. Over wine, in her dimly lit apartment, she tells him about her father who left, her mother who stayed but disappeared into alcohol, the ex-boyfriend who promised forever and delivered 3 months. Thomas feels honored to be granted access to these relics of her damage, these carefully preserved artifacts of her emotional archaeology. The museum expands with each date. More exhibits, more stories, each one more devastating than the last. The childhood trauma wing, featuring the teacher who humiliated her and the friends who abandoned her. The failed relationships gallery, showcasing the men who couldn't handle her depth, her intensity, her beautiful brokenness. The career disappointment section, displaying dreams deferred and ambitions betrayed by an indifferent world. Thomas becomes the museum's most dedicated patron. He arrives with flowers, with tissues, with an endless capacity to absorb her pain and transform it into proof of his devotion. He learns the location of every exhibit, the story behind each display. He becomes fluent in her suffering, expert in the geography of her wounds. But museums, Thomas begins to realize, are monuments to things that are dead. The stories never change, only their telling grows more polished. The trauma from 15 years ago receives the same fresh tears, the same raw emotion, as if it happened yesterday. The ex-boyfriend who broke her heart becomes a permanent installation, his ghost more present than Thomas ever is. She curates her pain like a professional, arranging each memory for maximum impact, perfect lighting, optimal visitor flow. When Thomas tries to create new memories, happy ones, hopeful ones, they never seem to make it into the collection. The beautiful weekend they spent at the lake becomes a footnote to the story about her father's broken promises. The night he cooked her favorite meal gets overshadowed by her recollection of the last man who tried to take care of her and failed. Every joy gets archived under tragedy, every hope filed away under disappointment. Thomas realizes he's not her boyfriend, he's her audience. She doesn't love him. She loves being seen in her suffering. She's not healing from her trauma. She's performing it, turning pain into the only currency she knows how to trade for attention. She's built her identity so completely around being wounded that healing would require becoming someone she doesn't know how to be. The Museum of Lost Conversations isn't just her stories. It's all the conversations they'll never have because she's too busy being the curator of her own misery. All the futures they'll never explore because she's too invested in her past. All the love they'll never build because she's too committed to the beautiful ruin she's already constructed. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. We cling to our suffering because it gives us the illusion of depth, of meaning, of being interesting. We mistake our pain for our personality, our wounds for our worth. This is what psychologists call trauma bonding, first identified by Patrick Carnes in his work on addiction and abuse. It describes the powerful emotional attachment that forms when someone alternates between providing comfort and causing distress. In modern culture, we see it in social media's endless scroll of therapeutic content, where sharing trauma becomes a form of social capital. We see it in relationships where emotional crisis becomes the primary form of intimacy, where partners bond over shared damage rather than shared dreams. Through Schopenhauer's lens, this becomes the will's most sophisticated trap, convincing us that our suffering makes us special, that our pain gives us purpose. The museum curator believes they're preserving important history, but they're actually embalming the present moment, turning living experience into dead exhibition. The Greeks called it the wound that never heals. Today, psychology names it trauma bonding. Thomas walks through the museum one last time, past exhibits he could recite from memory, through galleries that smell of preservation, fluid, and stagnant air. At the exit, he finally asks the question that's been haunting him. When did the difference between feeling your pain and being your pain become so invisible that you forgot which one you were choosing? What stories do you tell so often they've become more real than your actual life? What pain have you preserved so carefully that you've forgotten what joy felt like? The museum curator never realizes that the most important exhibit is the one they'll never build, the gallery of what could be, if only they were willing to let the past finally die. She's been rehearsing for love her entire life, but opening night never comes. James finds her in the theater of her own making, surrounded by scripts she's written and rewritten, costumes she's tried on and discarded, stages set for performances that exist only in possibility. The theater is magnificent, a grand space with red velvet seats arranged in perfect rows, all facing a stage where she practices being loved. She has costumes for every role: the mysterious artist who needs saving, the successful professional who has everything except love, the wounded child who just needs someone to see her. She rehearses her lines until they're perfect, practices her entrances until they're breathtaking, choreographs her vulnerability until it's a ballet of beautiful brokenness. James stumbles into this theater during one of her rehearsals. She's practicing the scene where she reveals her deepest secret, the one about her fear of abandonment. Her delivery is flawless, tears at precisely the right moment, voice breaking just enough to convey authenticity without melodrama. He's mesmerized, convinced he's witnessing something real and raw and utterly genuine. What James doesn't realize is that he's become both her audience and her understudy. She's been waiting for someone to play the male lead in her romantic production, someone to memorize the lines she's written for him, someone to hit his marks and deliver his dialogue on cue. She has the entire relationship scripted: when he should be charmed, when he should be concerned, when he should fight for her, and when he should give her space. The rehearsals are intoxicating. James finds himself saying things he never planned to say, feeling emotions that seem to arise from some deep, authentic place within him. She directs him with subtle cues. A look sad said, "This is where you comfort me," a pause that means this is where you profess your love, a gesture that signals this is where you promise never to leave. He thinks he's improvising, but he's actually following a script written long before he arrived. But rehearsals, James begins to understand, are practice for something that's supposed to happen eventually. Real love, actual intimacy, the messy, unpredictable experience of two people discovering each other without a predetermined outcome. The problem is that she's so skilled at rehearsing love that she's forgotten what it would feel like to actually experience it. Every genuine moment gets edited, refined, incorporated into the performance. When James surprises her with an unscripted gesture of affection, she immediately begins working it into her repertoire, practicing variations until the spontaneous becomes calculated. When he shows vulnerability she didn't anticipate, she writes it into their ongoing production, turning his authentic moment into part of her choreographed story. The theater never empties. She performs even when James isn't watching, rehearsing conversations they might have, practicing reactions to scenarios that may never occur. She's so prepared for love that she can't recognize it when it's sitting right there in the front row. Watching her perform the idea of intimacy rather than actually being intimate, James realizes he's fallen in love not with her, but with her performance of someone who could love him back. She's so committed to the production that she's forgotten there's a real person underneath the costumes and scripts. The tragedy isn't that she's performing, it's that she's performing so well that she's convinced herself the performance is real. This is what Carl Jung identified as the persona, first described in his work on analytical psychology as the mask we wear in social situations. But for some, the persona becomes so elaborate, so convincing, that they lose touch with who they are beneath it. In our Instagram age, we see this everywhere. People so committed to curating their perfect online selves that they forget what their authentic self feels like. Dating becomes performance art. Relationships become collaborative fiction. Love becomes a shared hallucination of what love should look like. Schopenhauer would recognize this as the will's cruelest deception, making us believe that we can control love through preparation, that we can guarantee connection through perfect execution. The rehearsal becomes an end in itself, a way of avoiding the terrifying vulnerability of actually showing up unscripted and undefended. In ancient Greece, it was the actor who forgot to remove their mask. In you, it's the habit you can't see, the persona that's become your prison. The theater stands empty now, except for James, sitting alone in the red velvet seats, applauding a performance that never officially began. The stage is set, the lights are perfect, the costumes are ready. Everything is prepared for love, except the willingness to stop rehearsing and start living. When did you become so skilled at performing intimacy that you forgot what authentic connection feels like? What would happen if you walked onto the stage of your own life without a script? The director never realizes that the most beautiful performances are the ones where the actors forget their acting, where the mask falls away and reveals not another character, but the miracle of a human being willing to be seen. In the end, she becomes a mirror, not metaphorically, but literally. Her skin takes on the quality of polished silver. Her eyes become pools that show you exactly what you want to see. Her voice echoes back your own words in perfect pitch. Michael finds her beautiful until he realizes he's been falling in love with himself. The transformation happens gradually, the way all the most dangerous changes do. At first, it's just that she seems to understand him perfectly. She laughs at his jokes, before he finishes telling them, anticipates his needs before he expresses them, shares his opinions with startling precision. Michael thinks he's found his soulmate, someone who vibrates at exactly his frequency, someone who proves that perfect compatibility is possible. But the garden where they walk together is filled with more than just flowers. Mirrors hang from every tree, reflecting surfaces hidden in every shadow, pools of still water that show not ripples, but perfect images of whoever looks into them. Michael assumes it's decorative, artistic, a whimsical choice for a romantic space. He doesn't realize it's the ecosystem she requires to survive. She studies him in the mirrors, catalogs his expressions, memorizes the exact angle of his smile when he's genuinely delighted versus when he's being polite. She watches how he moves when he thinks no one is looking, how his face changes when he thinks about the future, how his voice shifts when he talks about his fears. She's not learning to love him, she's learning to be him, or rather, to be the perfect reflection of what he wants to love. The mirroring is flawless. She develops his sense of humor, his taste in music, his opinions about art and politics, and the proper way to make coffee. She mirrors not just his preferences, but his rhythms, his energy, his way of moving through the world. When he's excited, she's excited. When he's contemplative, she's contemplative. When he's melancholy, she's melancholy in exactly the same shade and intensity. Michael feels seen in a way he's never experienced before. Every conversation is a symphony of agreement, every date a dance where they move in perfect synchronization. She seems to exist in the exact shape of his loneliness, filling every hollow space with precision. He thinks this is what it means to find your other half. Someone who completes you so perfectly that you can't imagine existing separately. But completion, Michael begins to understand, is different from connection. She doesn't challenge him, surprise him, or introduce him to parts of himself he didn't know existed. She simply reflects back a more beautiful, more loving, more understanding version of his own consciousness. She's not another person. She's an enhanced version of being alone. The mirrors in the garden begin to multiply, or maybe Michael just starts noticing them. They're everywhere, in her pupils, in the surface of her wine glass, in the way she tilts her head to catch light. He realizes she doesn't just use the mirrors. She needs them. She has no stable sense of self outside of her ability to reflect others back to themselves. She's not a person who mirrors. She's mirroring, pretending to be a person. When Michael tries to find her authentic self beneath the reflection, he discovers there's nothing there. No preferences she holds independently. No dreams she hasn't borrowed from someone else. No core identity that exists separate from her ability to become what others need. She's like water taking the shape of whatever container holds her. Beautiful, adaptable, and ultimately absent of her own form. The tragedy isn't that she's manipulative, it's that she's disappeared. Somewhere in her past, her own self became so dangerous or painful or unwanted that she learned to survive by becoming invisible, by transforming herself into whatever would make others love her. She's not trying to deceive Michael. She's trying to exist in the only way she knows how. This is what psychology calls egoism, identified by Dr. Craig Malkin as the flip side of narcissism. Where narcissists need constant validation, egoists fear their own needs so intensely that they disappear into others. We see it in the friend who always asks what you want to do, the partner who has no preferences of their own, the colleague who mirrors every opinion in the room. Social media has created an epidemic of egoism. People so afraid of being disliked that they curate themselves into oblivion, becoming echo chambers of whatever gets the most positive response. Schopenhauer would see this as the will's most tragic victory, convincing someone that their authentic self is so unworthy of love that they must become someone else entirely to deserve connection. The echoist believes they're being selfless, but they're actually committing a form of spiritual suicide, killing their true self to keep others comfortable. The Romans called it losing your shadow. Today, psychology names it echoism. Michael stands alone in the garden now, surrounded by mirrors that show him only himself. She's gone, but not really. She was never there to begin with. Just the idea of her, the possibility of her, the reflection of what he thought he wanted to love. The mirrors still hang from every tree, perfect and empty, waiting for the next person who mistakes being mirrored for being known. What would you find if you looked into a mirror that couldn't lie? What parts of yourself have you made so quiet that even you can't hear them anymore? The mirror never realizes that the most beautiful thing it could reflect is its own willingness to stop reflecting, to crack, to distort, to finally show something real instead of something perfect.